Welcome everyone. My name is Chintan Barwara. I'll be the host for your webinar today. Welcome to the CMA Australia webinar series. Today we've got Professor Brendan O'Connell, who's going to be talking about post-COVID opportunities for businesses and how senior finance professionals can help in kind of the shake-up that's happened in the last few months' time. Just a bit of housekeeping. What we've done is we've disabled the chat function on this webinar. However, question answer module is on. So if you have any questions to be asked, please feel to pop in your question anytime you like. What we'll do is we'll have 40 minutes of the presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time, 20 minutes at the end, to answer questions on that part as well. So that's a bit of housekeeping on it. So Professor Brendan O'Connell now. Brendan is the president for ICMA, and he's also the head of department accounting at RMIT. Brendan has extensive teaching experience and research experience in leading Australian universities and US, including RMIT, Monash, University of Richmond in Virginia. His research focuses on corporate scandals, corporate collapses, and business ethics, and has written a number of case studies on these topics as well. Brendan, over to you. You can talk a little bit about your presentation, then share your screen as well.
Yep, great. Okay, thanks, Chintan, and welcome everybody for this presentation. I hope you'll find it useful. It's a beautiful day here in Melbourne. I hope where you are is also great weather, and hopefully your business is coping okay with the COVID crisis and the aftermath. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now with my slides. So if you just bear with me for one moment, and hopefully this will come up in a moment. So
yep, perfect.
Can you see it? Okay, yes. Excellent. Okay, so we have a look at the title there to start with, and you can see that we're looking at post-COVID opportunities for business and how finance professionals, accounting and finance professionals really, can use this as an opportunity to, I guess, succeed. You know, one of the main things I want to kind of emphasise today in talking about this area is that it does create wonderful opportunities for finance professionals to actually I guess, benefit and add value to the organisation. But what it does require, though, in doing this is that you are very cognizant that it's an opportunity. Most people see the COVID crisis through the lens of a threat, and as a consequence, their thinking reflects crisis and threat. But it can create opportunity, and so that's kind of where I see us today looking at this. So I'll just move on to the next slide here, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of see what I'm trying to indicate here. Just bear with me for a moment here. I'm having fun with my technology here. Where are we? There we go. I think for some reason it's not giving me the. Okay. So the presentation structure. So one of the key areas I want to talk about today is that we need to move from this mentality of a threat towards seeing it as an opportunity. So it's really about changing our mindset so that we focus on it as an opportunity. Recognising, though, that there are serious issues that all organisations need to deal with here. Obviously, we also need to think about the role of finance professionals in crises and their changing information systems needs. And the reason why I talk there about changing information systems needs is that we need to recognise that we as finance professionals are providing key information needs to our managers, to our colleagues, and we're involved also in the strategic side of coming up with opportunities and providing information. We'll also talk about what does the prior empirical evidence tell us about businesses and management control systems during crises. And I'll finish with some concluding remarks that try to tie together some of what we've talked about. So that's the structure. So moving on to our introduction, most organisations have been in crisis mode for the past few months, and I know my own organisation, one of Australia's largest universities, it's been incredible seeing what's happened going on. I'm in a leadership position, managing Department of Accounting, which has got 32 staff, and I'm currently in a situation where I have to not only manage those individuals, but do a lot of cost cutting and other activities to deal with the aftermath of this crisis for us. And I'm sure the business that you work in is having similar challenges. What's tended to be the focus thus far for most organisations is short-term survival. So there's been a lot of focus on cost cutting. In my organisation, essentially every dollar of discretionary spending has been cut to zero. So no travel, no shall we say, entertaining clients, nothing. Everything's just been cut to zero. Which is, I guess, made things interesting because sometimes you do have to spend money to make money, and yet it's really moved to a zero-based budgeting approach. Cash flow forecasting and management has become a big focus. So obviously managing the serious cash flow implications of the crisis has become something that is taking up a lot of management time, including my own. Working capital management, something we should never forget. Managing your debtors and your creditors, as well as your cash flow, are critical to survival. We know that from the evidence that a key factor in organisations who end up insolvent is they fail to manage their working capital adequately. So I would be encouraging people listening in to monitor their accounts receivable very closely, their debtors, because the debtors can quickly blow out in terms of payment time, and not only does that affect your cash flow, but it also indicates you may never get paid. So you need to really manage that working capital carefully. Reducing the staff headcount. A lot of organisations have done that. They've had to lay off staff. My organisation essentially has been laying off casual staff, and we've also been not renewing contracts of a lot of staff on contract. We probably will have further layoffs of full-time staff in the coming months, and I think that's pretty typical of most organisations. And one thing I would emphasise is that although we've seen a lot of jobs lost in the last few months, there's probably a lag effect, and there's going to be a lot more lost over the coming 6 months or so. Sure, some people will be able to get back to work, but there are further job losses to come, particularly for large organisations like mine. The health crisis that's come from the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a recession already in most countries, certainly Australia, after almost 30 years of continuous economic growth, has now hit a brick wall, and we are really looking at pretty serious economic circumstances, and it will probably lead to a financial crisis in the coming 12 months. And the reason I say that is because you're going to start to see businesses liquidate, and there'll be a flow-on impact of that over the next 2 to 3 years. Governments have been pumping up the economies in many countries, and so there's been a lot of government spending in various areas, including providing payments to laid off people, as well as some infrastructure work. However, government stimulus options are likely to reduce in the future simply because they cannot continue to afford to be spending billions of dollars to keep things moving. So we cannot expect that governments, given we don't want them to I guess, jeopardise the position of the country. They cannot keep borrowing, and so the stimuli options are likely to reduce in the coming 6-12 months. I think something that's important to recognise is the rebound will be slower than many people seem to think. I have seen some politicians, particularly in America, suggest that the economy will come roaring back in the second half of the year. I sincerely doubt that that's going to be the case. It will certainly recover some of the losses for sure, but I think it's going to take several years for this to work through, particularly as unemployment has skyrocketed. And if you think about our economy, and most people measure the growth in the economy through GDP, gross domestic product, and the biggest component of GDP in most countries is in fact consumption. And with people out of jobs or worried about their jobs or taking pay cuts, that is going to hit consumption hard, and so that will dampen economic growth. So that's why the rebound will probably be slower than most people wish to recognise. In fact, we're probably at least 2 years away from things being back to somewhere near normal in our economy, and it could well be longer than that, given how severe this shock has been. If I look at my industry, it may never get back to where it was even 6 months ago. That's how drastically things have been impacted. Many job cuts are yet to hit, and when they will, it will further dampen consumer demand in our economy. In Australia, one of our largest service sectors is education, and most of the job cuts in our sector are actually yet to happen. So there's going to be this delay effect, but when it happens, it's going to be significant. Global trade. This is likely to remain subdued for some time. We've got a trade war happening, as we know, between America and China, the two biggest economies, and this has a flow-on effect for most of the world. Very few winners out of these sorts of trade tensions. So that will continue to be an ongoing issue and certainly will not help the recovery. So that's, I guess, the overall scheme of how things look. What about how we in an organisation can try to move from looking at all of this as a threat towards a more opportunity mindset and a focus in a crisis situation? While the outlook is sombre, some winners will emerge from the ashes of this situation. Organisations that stay fixated on crisis mode thinking are likely to be the ones that are the casualties because they stop forward looking. The mindset needs to move from crisis mode and reactionary thinking towards strategic planning for the future. A good way to start is for all organisations, large and small, to develop a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threat analysis. Now, some of you will be saying, oh, we've already done that. But what I'd be saying to you is the world has changed. So that SWOT analysis you did on your business 3 years ago or 1 year ago is probably redundant now. It needs to be redone to reflect the new world order. Many may have already done this in the past, the world has changed and we need to return it. We need to not, and we know that it will not return to what it once was. So we need to refocus, look at our SWOT analysis again, rework the assumptions, rework our analysis of the opportunities, and look at how we can move forward. So what has changed permanently? Well, first thing I think is pretty apparent to me is that people will be commuting less and working virtually much more than ever before. So even though a lot of workplaces are opening up again, I think a lot of people will continue to work predominantly from home, particularly in the service industries, and that is going to have a profound impact on our economy. People are going to be more risk averse than ever, so avoiding large gatherings. So even when a cure is found, if it is ever found for COVID, you will still see people being reluctant to engage in mass activities. Spending patterns have changed, so items such as clothing and white goods are being bought much more online than ever before. What this has done is it's decimated the traditional retail industry. So department stores and the like are really suffering from this change. So those in the services sector are one group that perhaps haven't been as affected. So if you think about someone in a professional accounting firm, for example, they're probably as busy as ever. I know when I talk to public practitioners in the accounting world, they tell me they're as busy as they've ever been because they've got a lot of clients contacting them, wanting to know things around government assistance, wanting to know about how to manage their cash flow more effectively, etc. in this time of crisis. So service industry, a lot of virtual working going on, but visits to clients will be far less frequent in this environment. Some industries will probably never fully recover or will be in a sustained down period. And some examples, this is not an exhaustive list, but here's some examples that I'd like to share with you. Main Street retail. So there I'm talking about the department stores, small retailers that have traditionally relied on walk-in customers wanting face-to-face help. They're suffering badly, and I don't think that market will ever return to where it is. People are going to be buying a lot more online. We know that's already happened. I don't think they're suddenly all going to revert back to going into stores. The next one, there's all of travel-related industries. So this is a pretty big group encompassing accommodation, airlines, amusement parks, all sorts of things. And there's little doubt that industry has been decimated. Sure, it will slowly recover, but it's going to take several years and it may never get back to normal. It's hard to tell. But if you think about, say, the second half of 2020, even when the airlines start flying again internationally, there's still going to be quarantine restrictions and health requirements and also issues around travel insurance in terms of COVID that mean probably traditional tourism is not going to return to anywhere near it was for quite some time. Hospitality is another industry that's been decimated. Hospitality, when it comes to things like eating out, we're starting in Australia to see some of the restaurants and pubs, etc., reopening, but with very restricted capacity, and a lot of people, particularly older people, reluctant to mix socially. So the hospitality industry has taken a real hit and will take a long time to recover. And then the last one I've got on the list there, probably because it affects me the most, is universities. And we've gone through 30 years of growth on the back of international student demand for our courses, and that has come to a screaming halt this year. It was already looking a little bit soft, but it's now come to a screaming halt, and so the university finances are being affected dramatically. Pretty well every university, certainly in Australia where I live, a lot of universities are in crisis mode at the moment, looking at deficits as big as $500 million. So there's going to be a large number of jobs lost, and I don't think the university sector will ever get back to where it was before all of this. So we're probably one of the biggest casualties. However, there are winners, and some of the winners in this world of post-COVID are big tech. So these are your big online retailers and the like, Amazon, Google, etc. They are very much set up to succeed in an online environment, particularly when it comes to people buying and selling online. Logistics industry, so particularly around home delivery, are also booming. Online streaming, so if we think about Netflix and all of the other streaming channels that are available online, they're all booming. And communication services, so the various tech companies that provide Zoom and other types of platforms for communication are also going through very prosperous times. So what has changed permanently? For small and medium-sized business, I think business development work is an area that has changed permanently. It's now moved to a virtual world, which means that digital marketing is more important than ever. And I know with CMA we use LinkedIn as a digital marketing tool for us to get out to our existing and prospective members. And I think all businesses need to target digital platforms where they can get their message out to their potential customers more. So I think that area has certainly changed. Business-related travel will be far less frequent. I think that's pretty obvious, which is bad for the airlines and associated industries, but that's the world in which we live. You know, I traditionally have travelled a lot myself for work, but that certainly hasn't happened this year and probably will be reduced significantly the following year. Tourism will take years to fully recover. I've mentioned that earlier. High unemployment is here to stay, which is not a good thing for not only for those who suffer unemployment, but also for the general economy. This is leading to social unrest. You know, if you look at what's been happening, particularly in America in the last few weeks, we know there's been a terrible incident happened there that started off a lot of social unrest, but you need to also look at some of the underlying factors around that social unrest. For example, people losing jobs, people being forced to stay home for months. These things have all built up, and we probably, given that high unemployment is with us to stay, need to recognise that social unrest is an unfortunate byproduct that will be with us for quite some time. Hot desking is another one to think about. If you talk to people who work in professional services firms, such as the Big Four accounting firms, in recent years, one of the hot trends for them is hot desking, where people come in and out of the central office. They don't have their own office as such. They hot desk out of there using different spaces. And due to health concerns, hot desking is probably going to become less common. And so we're probably going to move to a new model where people work much more from home permanently, and even visits to clients will be probably less likely than in the past. There's also going to be increased attention to cleaning processes and flexible work options within organisations, so that not everyone is working together at the same time. So that'll take getting used to. And I know in my organisation at the moment, most of us are not allowed to actually go into the office, even though they could reopen the offices. They're only allowing those who are considered essential to do so. The rest of us are expected to continue to work from home. So there's some of the permanent changes as I see them. So what opportunities do we see coming out of all this? Well, the first one, somewhat controversially, is this can actually lead to increased staff productivity from working at home. I know from my own perspective, I'm saving 2 hours of the day in lost productivity because I don't have to commute. So probably my productivity has increased. And it's not just the saving on the commuting time, it's also less distractions. You know, I can focus on jobs without someone knocking on my door, and that can be quite useful. And I look at my emails when I need to. I don't let them distract me all the time. So increased staff productivity can be an advantage. However, I would caution on one issue, and that is there is some early research out there that shows that while the productivity of us males has increased due to the COVID crisis, females may have actually declined due to homeschooling requirements and meal preparation, which is probably a bit of an indictment on us males. But so it is a bit of a mixed benefit in terms of increased staff productivity there. Another opportunity, I think, there's an old saying about never waste a crisis. And I think some organisations are seeing it as an opportunity to remove deadwood staff that perhaps were harder to get rid of or to justify getting rid of in better economic times. I also think, particularly for those of you who work in consulting kind of jobs, there's a lot of opportunity out of this because you're getting hit with clients coming to you wanting advice around things like government assistance and support, cash flow management, etc. And you can use that to leverage future business opportunities with those clients as time goes on. So I think that's a really good opportunity. Another opportunity for organisations is they can reduce their accommodation bill because more staff are working from home, so they don't have to buy as much expensive or lease as much expensive office space in the middle of major cities. So there's a saving there. So that's a little bit about some of the opportunities. Now what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about what does the empirical evidence tell us about businesses and particularly management control systems during crises. Many small and mid-sized businesses will never reopen following the crisis or be much leaner, causing millions of jobs to be lost. This vulnerability of smaller organisations reflects their lack of cash reserves, tight cash flows and profit margins, and deficiencies in strategic planning. At the core of any organisation's response to a crisis is its management control system. Some key management control system features that are critical to survival of organisations are developing organisational goals and targets, encouraging new goals and priorities, signalling key strategic priority areas, challenging the status quo, identifying new strategic initiatives and implementation approaches, and acting as a learning tool. So if we think about, there's a lot in that there that I've shown you, but I'll just use the example of my organisation. You know, we've had a lot of focus in recent weeks on how we cut our costs and manage our cash flow. But during that same period, we're doing our strategic planning and we're trying to work out what are some new opportunities for us in terms of offering new programs and perhaps restructuring things we do to drive us forward. So as much as we're dealing with the crisis as it's unfolded, we've also tried to start to push forward so that we can adapt and succeed going forward. And I would say to you, that you need to think about that side of it very carefully. So if you look at all those points I've made there in that bottom section, these are around goals and targets, strategy, priority areas, and you need to really be thinking about that now. There was a study done by Pavlotis and Kostakis, which was quite interesting, and I thought I'd share it with you. And they looked at the time of the global economic crisis, which was, around about 10 years ago, wasn't it? And what they found was the management control systems were heavily utilised for industry analysis during that time. Cash budgeting for controlling costs, long-range forecasting, strategic planning, competitor cost assessment, and customer profitability analysis. So if you think about all those aspects, so even though they're in a financial crisis, companies were looking at analysing their competitors. They were looking at how they might look in the long range. So they weren't just focusing on the cash budget or the budget for controlling costs. They were looking at these other areas as well. And they're also looking at customer profitability analysis. So trying to work out which customers they have, which are profitable to them, and perhaps which customers were less profitable to them. So these are the sort of good analysis that you should be looking to be doing now. Those aspects less utilised by managers during a time of crisis include traditional cost accounting applications such as absorption costing, return on investment, and residual income. So I think that's interesting as well, isn't it? So, very much looking at contemporary approaches to strategic management accounting. Another interesting study that I thought I'd share with you in this area of management control systems was done by Chenall and Moores in 2015. And they looked at how organisations adapt their management control system to deal with uncertainty. So how did they change it to deal with uncertainty? And what they found is that the systems become more complex and include not only traditional tools like budgets and variance analysis, but also more sophisticated techniques such as activity-based costing, the balanced scorecard, and target costing. So I'd ask you, do you have the capability at your organisation to do any of these things? Can you do activity-based costing? Can you develop a balanced scorecard? And do you practice target costing? These are the sorts of things that may need to be done to adapt your systems to deal with the uncertainty. Because what these sort of innovations do is they make your accounting system provide more accurate data around your costs through, say, activity-based costing, and also more around how you map what you do against your overall strategy, which you can do through the balanced scorecard. And then, of course, target costing can enable you to offer competitive products at prices that still make money for you. So these are sorts of things you should be looking to adapt, or adopt, I should say. What about the role of finance professionals in crises and the changing information systems needs? Well, I think we need to, it sounds a little bit cruel, but never waste a crisis mentality. So in other words, we need to use this as an opportunity to be innovative and to provide meaningful solutions. These and other opportunities will require accounting and finance professionals to be key providers of management information and to act as change agents within the organisation. The management control system will need to evolve to provide quicker and more useful data for management decision making. So some of those things I mentioned on the previous slide are designed to provide quicker and more useful data for decision making. And I know in my own organisation, some of the traditional reports we used to receive are being overhauled to provide much more specific information. So, for example, instead of me seeing enrolments, I'm now seeing it dissected much more into different programs, different courses, etc. And that's just one small example. Costing approaches will need to be better at mapping costs across the diverse product, service offerings and geographic markets that we operate in. Lumping costs together as overhead and not properly allocating them is something that creates, I guess, potentially information that's not so useful. So we really need to be better at mapping our costs across our diverse product and service offerings. We also need to be making sure we're doing ongoing profitability analysis on potential new products and services and initiatives to rationalise business operations. This is happening at my organisation at the moment. You know, we're looking at new opportunities, in our case, new programs, new markets in which we can operate. But we're also looking to rationalise some areas as well, close down some programs. And you need to be able to do the numbers to assess the profitability and the impact of those sorts of decisions. Greater use of cutting-edge management accounting techniques, such as the ones I mentioned earlier, is another area that we need to be drivers. So whatever traditional costing system you use at your organisation, you may wish this might be the opportunity for you to overhaul that. And of course, cash flow analysis will become even more important than ever. One approach you might wish to consider, and those of you who've done the CMA course with Janik or myself or Dr. Chris in the past will be familiar with this, is try and divide your products and services into one of the following four groupings. So the first are what we call the cash cows. So these are our products or services that have high market share but low market growth, but they're providing good cash flow to us. These sorts of products and services have a position of some strength because they generate a large amount of cash for the business, and the aim should be with those sort of products to maintain market share and then therefore get the good returns of cash flow coming through. The second group of products and services you need to look at are what we call the stars. These are the products that are they've got high market share and they've got high market growth. Now these sorts of products and services, needless to say, are the ones that we really value the most, and they have the most potential for further growth. And so a key focus there will be to at least hold our market share in that growing market, if not to try and grow it. Another group of products and services we might have are what we call the wildcats. These are those products or services that have a low market share, but they're in a high growth market, I really should say there. Now these ones, we need, they've got great potential. So we need to try and expand, if possible, our market share with those types of products. If we're able to do that, then they can turn into stars for us. So that's the third group. And then the fourth group is the dogs. These are the products that perhaps have a low market share or low market growth, and we need to make serious decisions about what we do with those products. They're probably producing very little cash flow for us. Expansion may be only possible by improving efficiency and cutting costs with those, cutting prices, I should say. So with those, we need to consider whether we keep on offering that product or service, or whether we should just get rid of them, slaughter them. So the idea of that particular slide really is just to break it down into the 4 categories. So you should look at your products and services and see where they fit within those 4 categories. So that gets me to my concluding remarks. A crisis of the current breadth and scale requires wider considerations such as supply chain implications, technology impacts, and more diverse risks such as employee health and safety and government quarantine requirements, just to name a few. Challenges for business now and going forward are immense. Well-managed businesses will not only survive, but will prosper going forward. The management control systems will need to adapt to reflect the information needs of management going forward, including a very tight focus on costs, cash flow management, more accurate measurement of the profit and loss of different products, services and markets, and financial modelling, importantly, of future capital investment and restructuring activities. Skilled accounting and finance personnel who are able to contribute high-level strategic financial advice during these times will be more important than ever to businesses. So that's the good news for us, that we're more important than ever. And then my last slide, just there, some references for those of you who would be interested in reading in more detail any of those articles that I referred to. I believe we'll make those slides available to members, Chintan, is that correct?
That is right, Brendan. What we'll do is we won't share the slides, but we will actually send a link of this video recording of this webinar.
Oh, okay.
To everyone, yeah, so they'll be able to kind of join the dots as well. So that makes it a little better for them. Okay,
well, that's great. So I hope you found that interesting. I'm happy now to try and answer any queries that are coming through.
So we've got a few questions already. Brendan, if you can stop sharing the screen.
Okay, yeah, I can stop sharing the screen. Okay.
Perfect. We already have 5 questions in line. I'll take it one by one if you don't mind. What I'll do is I'll read the questions.
Sure.
And you can answer them, so I can put it this way. Brendan, you mentioned that reference to clearing up dead wood. What do you think, how do you think this is going to be taken, especially when there's government assistance to a lot of businesses during this crisis time?
Look, I think that's an interesting question. I think that what organisations need to do is look very carefully at their headcount and to identify those people. And in some organisations, it will be a larger cohort than others, but have a look at them very carefully and see to what extent those people that are perhaps not as value adding as others, to what extent they maybe should be moved on. When I say moving people on, you know, it needs to be done with dignity, it needs to be done with fairness and within the law. So certainly I'd be encouraging you to do that. I was talking to someone today from another university, not mine, who was saying that they've already tapped on the shoulder a number of people, and those people won't be at the organisation for too much longer, but they will be getting their entitlements, you know, retrenchment kind of entitlements. It's like I said earlier, you know, never waste a crisis. And I said, oh, what are the characteristics of those folks? And the person said to me, oh, they're the ones that are not high performers. They're not seen as critical to the organisation going forward. But I do recognise, with that question that some people have been stood down but are receiving payments under various government schemes. So I'm assuming that those folks will be coming back at some point to those organisations in that situation. If that's the case, you need to look at their performance carefully. Of course, one could argue that you should always be looking at performance regularly, but of course, in good times, we tend to tolerate a much more lackluster performance than we would in bad times. So, yeah, I would certainly encourage people to use this as an opportunity to get rid of the deadwood, because that really is important, not only for the future performance, but also the morale of the hard workers in the place. Because there's nothing more, disappointing than being the person who's doing all the hard work and looking around and seeing other people who maybe are coasting along.
Oh, that's good. Thanks for that. We've got another question here. Just give me a second here. On which part will be the most priority for a CFO to spend the money after the COVID crisis to secure business?
Was it can you say the first bit there? The bit.
Yeah. So the question was, on which part will be most important, and which will be the most a priority for a CFO to spend money, considering the COVID crisis will probably finish in the next couple of months' time?
Well, it's a big question, isn't it? And I think it does to some extent depend on your organisation and what it does. But I think once you've got your systems and processes in place, I think probably looking at new opportunities, business development, but also looking at rationalisation as well of underperforming parts of the business. So yeah, probably those two: new opportunities, business development, and rationalising the underperforming parts, particularly the parts you see won't come back.
Right. Thank you. We've got another question here. I think your comment on working from home and the reference to males and females have struck quite a chord. One other person, anonymous attendee, is saying that my wife heard your reference to productivity, especially working from home, male versus female, and absolutely agrees with you. She thinks that organizations need to ask male employees to provide proof of housework productivity while working from home. That's a really interesting one. And how do you respond to that one?
Well, look, productivity is an interesting one, isn't it? Productivity is not just about turning up, sitting at your desk or whatever. And like if I look at my industry, how would you measure productivity of university academics? Well, and a lot of people probably would laugh and say you cannot, but actually you can, because in fact we're probably easier than most, because you can look at research outputs published in journals. It's pretty hard to fake that. You can look at research grants won. You can look at teaching evaluations of classes you run, see if the students are happy. So, productivity can be, I'm just using it as an example to say that productivity in some industries can be quite easily worked out. But in others, I would agree that it is a little bit more harder to put a finger on.
Yeah, and I think the follow-up question on that part as well is, of course, you can monitor productivity in a sense in terms of your work, because it's quite documented and you need reporting styles and everything else. But, as you said before, that women end up doing a lot more housework, homeschooling, cooking, cleaning, all these things as well. I think in a country like Australia, like if I give myself and my friends as an example as well, like we actually have been doing a lot of housework now. That's why we're actually waiting to go back to work, because there's a lot of stuff, especially with kids. Like I've got a 10-year-old, and the amount of school learning and things that you have to do at home, it's quite remarkable. So we're thankful that school's starting back next week. But I absolutely agree to that part as well, saying it has put strain on a lot of relationships where you have a small house or a big house, but being together in the same under the same roof for 24 hours a day, it does take a toll on everyone.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And, I think there's also some lessons for us about how we develop habits to improve our productivity. So, for example, I think you need to be a real self-starter when you're working from home. It's easy to get distracted, and have a routine, and use good time management techniques like running a diary and allocating time. In my case, I try and start reasonably early, but I have a big break at lunchtime where I go for a walk and recharge the batteries and then come back. And so I'm trying to manage that time effectively, but I'm fortunate that I don't have kids in the house, so I don't have that distraction. If you've got kids, it can be really problematic. And I know from talking to some of my staff who've got young children, it's a real challenge for them. And some of them are very keen to get back into the office for that reason, because they can, find a place where they can focus rather than distracted all the time. Whereas for me, this is better because I've got no distractions, really. It's great.
Yeah. There's another one based on that kind of thought process as well, saying that you say that women have become less productive during the COVID crisis by doing homeschooling and to look after the children. Aren't they being more productive? And I guess the answer to that, Brendan, if you don't mind answering this, I think it's a real shift in the way businesses look at their staff, and especially female staff. I've got friends and colleagues, and my wife as well, like their workplace was not in favor of working from home before this COVID crisis kind of turned up. And there were all kind of excuses in that sort of space saying, it's hardcore kind of work, you need to be in the office and all these kind of things. But what they've learned is now this being put on everyone, everyone's working from home and work's being done much more productive manner. Even though they have a lot of female in the teams as well with young children, things don't stop, and you have the flexibility to kind of don't do stop start clock in time. But if it takes more time, people do a little bit extra kind of thing as well. So there has been a shift in terms of how do you measure productivity from organizations as well. This is actually kind of in kind of a better understanding of family life balance kind of thing as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we're learning a lot about ourselves and through this crisis, I think, and how we operate. One of the other challenges, I think, has been having meetings, virtual meetings. And what I've found is that the virtual meetings generally work quite well if the group's not too big. But when you start having large gatherings online, it becomes more problematic. And, to give an example, I was part of a school meeting today that had over 100 people attending it online, and it was a bit of a shall we say, interesting experience, because you had people having trouble getting in. You had two links floating around, so half went into one link and the other half went into another link, and then there was some technology issues, and it was very one way, as you could imagine, in terms of the discussion. So I think the virtual work environment, when it comes to meetings, probably is fine when it's small groups, but when you're trying to meet with a big group, it's pretty hard to go past face-to-face, I think.
Yeah. I had another question here. I'm conscious of the time. We've got another 5 minutes. So we'll probably take another two or three questions. One of the questions here is, you mentioned something about saving on rental and office space, considering really working from home. The question is that most large organizations have long-term contracts. How do you navigate this, and what are your thoughts on like negating office space completely in terms of everybody working from home?
Well, the first thing I'd say on that is a lot of people have renegotiated their leases in recent times, haven't they, because of the COVID crisis. I remember a person I know, they had a landlord who was saying to their retail business, I'm not going to give you a rental reduction because of COVID or anything, and the response was, fine, when do you want me to drop the keys in? and as soon as he said that, they dropped the rent by 50% or something for the code.
Right.
So it is a time where you can renegotiate things, and we're seeing that in all areas of business. So it is actually an opportunity to renegotiate leases, I think, from a position of strength. Because the thing you've got to remember is that the landlord, if you walk away, they won't be able to fill that place for months, maybe even years. So the last thing they want is tenants walking out. So you're actually in a position of strength, I think, at the moment, if you're a leasing space.
That's good. Thank you, Brendan. I've got another one. We all use systems like SAP, Oracle for accounting. I feel that the current system has limitation in treating the accounting entries due to COVID impact, and we are relying on good old traditional journal entries to reflect the nature of the transactions. Do you think that is that statement true, that a lot of large organizations who use packages like SAP and Oracle have limitations in terms of treating, because it's an uncharted territory from my perspective, I think?
Well, it is. It's an uncharted territory. I think a lot of organisations have tolerated this for too long. I think, not having systems that are really reflecting their needs, and so this is an opportunity to rework the systems to make sure that they do better capture the needs of users. We've been doing it at the university. If the university can do it, I'm sure others can do it as well. So yeah, SAP and other techniques out there do provide opportunities for people to rejig the way they report things, and whether it's a matter of talking to the consultants or whether it's you're using your own in-house knowledge of how to amend those systems. I think it's important that you look to do that, because if you're operating on poor information, then it's going to be harder to navigate this current environment.
Thank you. We've got two last questions, and we'll try to cover it in the next couple of minutes. One of the questions is, mental health is a big issue during the COVID-19 crisis. Is it not important to work on strategies to tackle that issue now?
Yeah, well, definitely mental health is a big issue. I remember when I was talking to my staff in a meeting a few weeks back, and I asked them how they were coping with doing everything from home, and one staff member said they felt isolated. And, I think that is a concern for some people, definitely. Some people have handled it really well. Other people have struggled with it. And I think by talking to people and finding out how they're coping, you can then develop a strategy around how you can help them cope better. So if someone does indicate that they've got problems, then be seen as providing a solution or trying to provide a solution, or advice. I was talking to a staff member today who's got a young child, a baby really, and they're having trouble sleeping, they're having trouble finding the time to focus on their work. And I said, so what about if I was able to help you by providing an opportunity to come into the office a couple of days a week? And they were really happy about that, because they thought they couldn't do that. But you've got to try and help them work through this, certainly. So the first step is talking to them. And then the second step is identifying some strategies to help them cope. And look, some people might need even counselling in dealing with it. It really depends on the individual.
Thank you. I've got a last question here from Anonymous as well. I think students will come back to Australia if the universities do good teaching. They do not care about research, but all universities do not recognise good teaching. maybe universities should focus on what they are good at and not try to do a lot of research?
Yeah, well, that's a controversial question, isn't it? Look, the first thing I'd say to that is, why do people line up to study at Harvard University? Is it because of their teaching? Have they got a reputation for excellence in teaching? I think why people line up at universities is for so-called prestige. And then you have to ask yourself, so how do you achieve prestige? And the way you achieve prestige in the world of higher education is through research, unfortunately. and the other thing I'd say is the cure for COVID-19, when it comes, will most likely be driven by medical researchers. So I think we'd all agree we would like to be funding that sort of research. Yeah. So universities do a lot of important research. Sure, not every bit of research that comes out is necessarily of benefit to you or your next door neighbour, but sometimes those benefits are kind of long term. Like when the universities first came up with the internet, no one thought that would ever amount to much. Or when universities developed laser technology, no one thought that would ever come to much. And yet these things have changed our lives. So I think in defence of university research, it is important, and people do line up for research prestige. And if you think at all of the highly rated universities around the world, it's been built on the back of research. So I don't think it's a good idea to get rid of research. In terms of teaching, well, all I can say is student satisfaction with university teaching has improved dramatically in Australia in the last decade. And that's based on the measures we're using, student surveys, this sort of thing, dramatic improvement. So I think the teaching quality and the support students get now is a lot better than probably was when I was an undergraduate student.
No, thank you very much, Brendan. I think we're running out of time. We're actually over time now. But thank you, Brendan, very much for your insights in terms of what finance professionals should be doing or looking out for, considering this COVID crisis is not over yet. And we probably look forward to hearing from you in the near future as well. So thank you, Brendan.
Yep, no problem. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you all around, and hopefully businesses succeeding going forward in these tough times too. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Bye.